Almost 70% of refugees who illegally cross the U.S. border into Canada are granted asylum here, despite the widespread public view that these border crossers are not real refugees in need of protection. The data were released this week by the Immigration and Refugee Board. Since January, the RCMP have intercepted more than 15,100 people entering through unguarded border entry points from the United States, after President Donald Trump came into power and issued a series of executive orders to expedite deportation of foreign nationals and ban immigration from certain countries. Of the 10,790 asylum claims received from March to September of this year, the Refugee Board has processed 592, or 5.4%. Of those claims, 69%, or 408 cases, were granted asylum, while 141 were rejected. 43 other claims were either abandoned or withdrawn. The acceptance rate for the border crossers is even higher than the 63% overall rate for asylum seekers in 2016. One expert said the group's high acceptance rate could be skewed if the Refugee Board is prioritizing cases from countries that tend to have stronger claims. However, academics and refugee advocates also emphasize the data show the border crossers have a legitimate need for protection. The numbers show that the majority of the so-called border crossers have genuine asylum claims. The message I take is that the Canadian refugee system is working. It is doing its job, said Queen's University immigration and refugee law professor Shari Aiken. Aiken and others are concerned that only a small fraction of the claims have been processed so far. The Refugee Board is under-resourced despite the spike in the number of claims. With the U.S. temporary protection of the Haitians in the country ending in January, Canada will see another spike of border crossers and we need to be ready for it, she said. The experts also question the validity of the Canada's Safe Third Country Agreement, which is based on the assumption the two countries have comparable asylum systems and bans refugees from seeking asylum in both. The agreement doesn't apply to those who cross into Canada at unmarked points along the border, which critics say encourages asylum seekers to make dangerous treks through no man's land, most commonly in Quebec, BC and in Manitoba. A recent Ipsos poll found many Canadians doubted if border crossers are legitimate refugees, with 67% saying these migrants were trying to bypass the legal immigration process. A separate poll by Angus Reid found that 57% of respondents disapproved of Ottawa's handling of the border crossers, with 53% of the participants in the survey saying Canada was being too generous to the asylum seekers. In recent months, the majority of the border crossers have been Haitians, who have been staying in the U.S. under a special immigration designation by the Department of Homeland Security. However, their special status is due to expire by the end of the year and the 58,000 Haitians there must leave the U.S. The Refugee Board has been pushing for additional resources to deal with surge in claimants, a request that so far has been ignored by Ottawa. On Wednesday, the board took the unusual step of publicizing the processing data of the irregular border claims. Whether a refugee is admitted at a border crossing or makes a refugee claim after having entered Canada is irrelevant to whether she is in danger in her country, said Raoul Boulakier of the Refugee Lawyers Association of Ontario. It is troubling that public discourse has fallen into discussing these refugee claimants as if they are different. They are refugee claimants. That means the refugee claimant's case must be adjudicate fairly and impartially, and the question for the Refugee Board to answer is whether she is at risk in her country. According to the Refugee Board, 160 of the 10,790 border crossers have been detained because they are deemed a danger to the public, are unlikely to appear for examination or are inadmissible on grounds of security and criminality, or simply for failing to provide proper identification. Among the 61 people who were deemed inadmissible, 34 have been ordered to be removed from Canada, 1 was prohibited from seeking asylum, 3 were allowed to stay in the country and 6 withdrew their claims. 1 person failed to show up for the admissibility hearing. The rest are awaiting a final decision. Janet Dench, of the Canadian Council for Refugees, believes the relatively high acceptance rate is likely the result of the Refugee Board's policy to expedite claims from certain priority countries, including Afghanistan, Burundi, Egypt, Eritrea, Iraq, Syria and Yemen. However, so far, the data does seem to vindicate border crossers, who are viewed as illegal economic migrants by some Canadians. The statistics highlight the fact that the majority of those crossing the border for asylum need our protection, Dench said. Critics have been calling on Ottawa to suspend the Safe Third Country Agreement, which was introduced in 2004 to limit refugees to making an asylum claim in the first of the two countries they arrive in order to avoid duplicate claims that would clog both systems. The agreement is not functional. Guarding a regular border crossing is straining our resources, said Queen's University's Aiken. If the government wants to have a grip of the refugee flow, they should suspend the agreement and have people come through the regular port of entry. Immigration Minister Ahmed Hassan did not immediately respond to a request for comment. The Refugee Board declined to comment about the Safe Third Country Agreement, but said it currently has 40,800 claims in the backlog, including 5,300 pending cases filed under the old rules before December 2012. Claimants are expected to wait 17 months for an asylum hearing. Correction. October 20, 2017. This article was edited from a previous version that mistakenly said the Refugee Board has 40,800 claims in backlog, in addition to the 5,300 pending cases filed under the old rules before December 2012.